every week, and I think that part is there. I think as a head coach, I realized, well, listen, when I went into all those schools, I was in several places, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and there was an overwhelmingly positive feedback, from a junior college in Kansas and Texas and Iowa to a high school in Illinois, like just everybody coming. I mean, even just in hotels, uh, people at the practices or the facilities where you're at that are coming up to you. Had a groundskeeper in Council Bluffs, Iowa, blowing leaves around, came over and recognized me back from my Iowa days and talked about the excitement to see Illinois where it is. So yeah, there's a lot of positives that you can't put a price tag on it. Like from a recruiting standpoint, the day in the life of I was on a NCAA Zoom call because I'm on one of these committees that during a normal week I wouldn't be able to do, but because we had a bye week, I was, sitting in a little dungeon for 2.5 hours on a Zoom call. And even the people on that Zoom call or other colleges, they're very complimentary about what they've seen. So it's been a lot of positives for sure.
Thanks, Coach. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Well, you kind of mentioned it after the game at Penn State, but can you detail, how critical it might be this bye week practice or these next couple of practices for the your Devo guys and the guys that haven't had a whole lot of time comparatively to the guys that have had high reps through 5 games?
Yeah, Matt, to be honest, kind of two different worlds, right? So the Devo guys are always, that's how we're wired. I think that program will always be that way. And it's an easier way, like literally half the reps today went to those guys, but the other half went to the twos, right? So those guys that are literally, today I saw Malik Elzy, Kapka Jones, Donovan Leary, on the offensive line, Brandon Henderson, TJ McMillan, several tight ends on the defensive side to see some of those young defensive linemen, outside linebackers, DBs. Mac Rossetich had a couple really big plays today. Sabor Kareem had a couple really nice things. Malachi Hood made 2 unbelievable plays right in front of me. So I think the value of those reps, I told them all after practice, listen, there's some of you guys that are sitting here right now that we may need you, in the second quarter against Purdue. We may need you in the 2-minute mark against Purdue. We may need you 2 weeks from now. We may not need you till the second to last week of the game of the season. But when that moment comes, we got to be ready, and that's been really big.
When you talk about self-evaluation, like according to Bob's question, do you get together with your coordinators and kind of go, hey, if you were to play Illinois, how would you beat them? Like how is that part of the conversation?
Oh, that's weekly, but I think Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I took all of the film from the first 5 games. So anytime you watch it, and then also because we have a bye week, you can't normally do this during a season, but you view the game so much differently. Saturday night flying home, that's one thing, right? Sunday to view it again is another thing. But then I watched it Monday and Tuesday of Penn State, and you just when you don't become so emotionally tied to it, right? Like I literally couldn't sleep, eat, or digest what was happening on Saturday after the game, and then Sunday, maybe less than a little bit, but I just got all worked up again, and then Monday. So like, there's definitely an advantage to the days removed, and then I think without a doubt, right now we probably offensively, defensive, and special teams should have as good an understanding of who we are as at any other point, right? And we've been, fairly healthy, right? Obviously Cole Rusk has been eliminated, but that would happen early on, right? Unfortunately, it was a really tough conversation for Ashton Hollins, like probably one of my favorite kids to be around, but now he's kind of removed, but that opens up the door for somebody else. So, there's a little bit of everything going on, coach to coach, coordinator to a head coach, coordinator to his assistant coaches, coaches to their players. There's many different levels going on right now.
Thanks, Brett. Be safe.
Yeah.
Hey, Brett. Tom Canavan with the AP. How are you?
Good, Tom. How are you?
Good. I'm doing kind of one of those off-week pieces. If you look around the Big Ten, the vast majority of starting quarterbacks are transfers. I think you can count on one hand the guys who have been recruited and started. Why is having your quarterback so important these days?
Well, I think the definition of that in itself it's changed, right? There was a point in time where you didn't have any other choice other than to recruit, high school, develop, and plug in as people transitioned out, right? So my first ever transfer quarterback was a guy by the name of Russell Wilson, which was really the first ever grad transfer time that happened, right? So the reason that came about is I had another quarterback, John Budmeyer, who's now the wide receiver coach at the University of Iowa, was the highest recruited quarterback I'd ever signed. And unfortunately, because of health issues, his immune system attacked his nervous system in this crazy sequence of events. And the only reason I went after Russell is he was no longer able to function as a quarterback. And our second string quarterback, who should have been taking over the role, tore his ACL. And our next quarterback was a redshirt freshman who had never been on campus for fall camp. So there was a lot of dynamics that went into that. And now the reason we went and got Russell was because of the need, and it was legal, right? And then a crazy story. Then Danny O'Brien, who's now the quarterback coach for Penn State, I signed him the year after Russell because we still didn't have John return, and we needed to have a transfer quarterback bring us depth. So now Danny came in, and now he's a quarterback coach at Penn State, who I saw before the game Saturday. Just crazy, right? So I think it's just more of a natural need. When I got here, they'd had transfer quarterbacks. I obviously went out and recruited Art, and then because of that situation led us to Tommy DeVito. I wasn't going to sign another transfer quarterback, but when the NCAA said Tommy DeVito couldn't get another year, that's when I went out and went after Luke. I'm very excited last spring to keep Donovan Leary because I think he's going to be an incredibly good quarterback, and he would be the first one that could potentially come from within our program. And I'm excited to see that. Trey Petty had a really good day today out of practice, another young man we recruited out of Starkville. So I think the definition of what we think is normal is now gone. The new normal is to be able to get a quarterback that you need to play right now.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hey, Brett, I mean, you just mentioned, with the 2 bye weeks, how it set up the season kind of nicely. And most years you either have to have a week 0 game. This year I think it's just the schedule that got you to. Would you like to see like 2 bye weeks just built into the schedule every year, regardless of how the calendar flows?
Yeah, to be fully transparent, ever since I've become a head coach, I've always tried to get 2. It's just the way it kind of has always worked out. Even when I was going back to my early years at Wisconsin, we always try to play an early game to try and get a double bye week. I just think it allows. We've done fairly well out of bye weeks. I think the style of play we play to allow your body to have a little bit of recovery twice during the year is very essential if possible. It's not a absolute must have, but it's definitely one I like. And I literally brought that up to administration my first week on the job here to try and enable that whenever we can. So that you're right, this year it was naturally built in for every team, but in the years forward, and then even my first year, the reason we did week 0 in Nebraska was to get that extra bye week, as well as my second year.
I guess sort of a follow-up to what Jeremy asked recruiting-wise, but you mentioned after the Kansas game that you were hearing from a bunch of people and maybe some that hadn't maybe been as interested before that. Did you see that in person then when you got out, just that there's maybe a little more interest?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult now, Scott, just because like we can't have face-to-face with the players, but the coaches for sure, just general people. I was in Illinois yesterday, and I mean, even, we had an hour to kill, so we stopped at a food establishment, a Subway, right? And like 4 people came up to us when they saw who we were and what we were, right? Like just all kinds of little things like that. But overwhelmingly, conversations. We have a nice 4-game stretch here where 3 of the 4 are at home. So official visits, unofficial visits, people coming for the game, kids coming for games that were committed to other places. It's very, very apparent, what the buzz has been about us. And I know our players and as coaches, we didn't take any consolation prizes on Saturday night, but a lot of people were very complimentary about, being in the position we were in and where we're at. But it's definitely from the outside world coming in. It's very apparent. And then the other thing that I would say, and I know you guys cover it, especially some of you in full detail, we still don't have clarity on what our rosters are going to be. I think we know, right? It's supposed to be 105, and you can have scholarships up to 105, and wherever we end up being as administration, I'm literally in conversation with Josh and Roger, but we had kind of orchestrated a signing class where we thought we were going to be at 85, and then was beginning to make some procedural plans if we were going to go above that number and how that was affected, plus projected portal transfers for us. You know, the month of December, a lot of you guys follow this, you know, no longer in the month of December can we go out at all. So all of December recruiting will be on our campus, which presents a very unusual dynamic that has never been seen before, because the signing date is on that first Wednesday in December. Like I just keep pushing all the NCAA people, like, listen, we got to know the answers to these questions, man. Like, and they got to come sooner than you can ever imagine. And then just full transparency, you know, we're working with a 120-man roster right now. Of course, we're going to lose X number of players to graduation and eligibility, but like, what players are going to need to be moved on from, right? Or look into other options, just because we physically may not be able to have that same number going forward. And then when that number becomes effective, it's still not decided, right? Is it first day of classes? Is it first game? When is it? There's just a lot of moving parts that for us, is our job as head coaches, it's at an unprecedented level of gray. Like, I mean, I'm a guy that loves gray, but man, this is insanity right now.
Thank you.
Hey, Brett, given the value of a couple days to rewatch and to digest Saturday's game, what's the biggest thing that stood out to you, or the biggest things that stood out to you?
Well, I told our kids after the game, and then I told the guys that were in the building with us today, because they weren't in the locker room. You know, on my flight over to Penn State, there was no doubt in my mind that we had prepared extremely hard. We had, put, in my opinion, everything into the preparation and the opportunity. I told them I thought we had a really good football team headed to State College, and returning, I feel the same way. You know, I actually read to them some comments from Penn State's players and coaches about the respect they had for what we had, right? And I mean, they, you know, basically put ourselves in a position to start off with a opening drive to go up for a touchdown at the end of the first half. Could be in a really good scenario, but you know, it didn't play out the way that we had hoped, and because of that, we had a setback. And the biggest thing we had to do is we had to learn, and then we had to leave it, right? And there was a lot of positives, but there are a lot of things we needed to learn. We couldn't let those moments fall on deaf ears. You know, offensively, defense, special teams, there were definitely enough things that caused us to fail. Now, Penn State did a really good job in certain regards that give kudos to them, but we did enough things, self-inflicted offense, defense, special teams, that, you know, whether it be the first time we were watching it after the game to the third time on Monday and Tuesday, we have to learn from those mistakes. To go on the road, play a ranked team in a hostile environment, you can't end up in a moment we were offense, defense, and come away with the answers we provided. That can't happen for us to have success when that moment comes again.
And then I've been kind of meaning to ask, Daniel Brown hasn't been playing, he's been on the injury report, I guess. Do you have like a timeline for what that looks like for him?
Yeah, I was actually in Hutch. His coaches were asking about him, you know, quite a bit, and like he unfortunately kind of had a lingering back issue. Did a lot of proactive things, tried to kind of bring it along, and then at some point, I believe in week 2, we just decided to kind of shut it down, mobilize him, and he's actually beginning to work a little bit last week, and we didn't get him in practices this week, but the hope is to get him involved in practice next week. And then we got a 7-window a season where we can kind of at least play him in 4 and kind of see how it's going, even if it's got to maybe play a week or 2 and then sit one out, right? I really am pushing the NCAA hard on, we just need to make everybody have 5 years of eligibility, right? Like, you can say whatever you want, but like some of these issues that are popping up around redshirt, you know, and these uncomfortable moments. You saw one come to light last week on a national scale, a couple others that were kind of off the radar that were really, yes, they were around certain issues, but the catalyst was the whole 4-game redshirt thing, right? Like, and there's been enough talk now. I've been hearing about this since 2006 when I became head coach, of ensuring 5 years of eligibility. I just don't think it does anything but promote health and well-being within our sport, and it allows us to avoid potential negative scenarios, which we kind of saw over the last couple of weeks.
Appreciate it, Brett. Thanks.
Yep.
Hi, Coach. With the early signing period coming up here just in a couple of months, when you're sending these coaches out on the recruiting trail? Is the focus more on shoring up, the current class, the class of 25, or is it, building relationships for future classes, or maybe a little bit of both?
It's three, Doug. It's three. It's honestly, it's about, a lot of times, like I just said, I was in schools where we have kids on our current roster, and the best way to ensure being helped in moments in the future at those type of programs is to continue to build relationships with the coaches that are there over our current roster. And then we have guys that most immediately, like you're saying, are going to, sign with us or somebody in December of 2024 here, right? That project into our 2025 class. And then for where we are, we just do a lot of also forecasting for 2026 and 2027s, and believe it or not, 2028s, right? So we're that far out, right? And that's just the way the world is right now. To be honest, I have a code system that we had to use because we're working so many different classes. You got to make sure you're in the right class for the right type of contact. Like we can call 25s, we can only text 20. I'm sorry, we can call 25s, but you can only text 26s, right? There's like all these rules that you got to make sure you're abiding by that can get a little bit overwhelming, but we really got all irons in the fire right now, every day, all day. And as far as sending coaches out right now, it's really kind of a little bit of both. If we're in the area for a 2025 commit or a 2025 top target, and there's a 2026 in the area, we'll kind of play that into it as we can.
As you were talking about, the landscape has changed so much and the scholarship situation is kind of up in the air, but do you still like to leave some wiggle room for the spring and then for the transfer portal after the season?
Well, there's another case in point. Right now there's a proposal to not only, have it into a one portal season, right? Which means December would be the only window that it could be available. That's probably going to hopefully be decided here sooner than later, because if that goes into effect, it totally changes the scholarship count of where we're at. The other one that's an X factor right now, which has been an awesome thing, is, it no longer has to be your 10 accountable coaches out on the road. So I've removed a couple of my accountable coaches, my coordinator types, and put a couple guys on the road. Art Sikowski's been out on the road for us. Dre has been on the road for us. So there's some nuances there in the recruiting world that allow us to have those guys out on the road more, and kind of use their manpower hours a lot better than when we have coaches that are tied into game plans during the course of the fall. So that's kind of a fun time for us.